All right, hello everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to session number 2 in our series, talking about how God has made himself available to all mankind from generation to generation. How without fail, there's always been a way for men and women that would seek after God, that would have it in their heart to find God and to search him out. That has always been available to mankind. And we're going to look at what that looked like throughout history, how God has made himself available to mankind with his perfect plan, and it's an amazing study. So we're gonna recap on kind of what we talked about last week. We talked about 2 verses, and we're gonna continue to use this as a focus. On Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 through 8, we read, "Ask and it shall be given you, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened to you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened." It's an amazing promise that Christ gave us. And we'll find that it's always been available for those that would seek God and to knock and to search him out. God always was able to answer that. We also see in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and 13, it says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." This has been the whole duty of man ever since the beginning, for us to seek out God and to find his ways and obey him. And I think it's very important to understand how God has made that possible throughout the history of mankind. How everybody has had the opportunity to seek God out, to find his ways, and to honor him, and to serve him, and to obey his commandments. So we're going to look into the book of Job today. So we talked about how from Adam all the way down to Noah and Noah's descendants, how there has been an unbroken chain where people were able to communicate God's ways, the teachings of God, to learn about him, all throughout that time. And I often wonder, what did that look like? What did it look like? What did this understanding look like? What did these people know? How learned were they? Was it effective? Was God's plan effective? And of course, God has a perfect plan. And as we understand it, as we look at it, we actually see how perfect his plan was. In the book of Job, we find an incredible scenario. We see Job he's being tried, and he's probably going through some of the hardest things any man has ever gone through up until this point. And it was a test or the trial for Job. It's one of the hardest things for people to understand when they study Scripture. Why did these things happen to Job? And it's been a study of interest for many scholars for thousands of years. People have been looking into this and studying this to see what they could learn from this incredible book. And it's an incredible gift that God gave us, and it's incredible in so many different ways. We're going to take a different look at it today. We're going to look at what these men look like, what their faith looked like, what their understanding looked like. And we're gonna find that as we go through the book, that these men, Job and his friends, all had an incredible reverence for God. They were dedicated to God. They spent their life seeking the wisdom of God and the understanding of his ways to learn as much as they could about him. And it's an incredible story. Now, his friends did err. They did. They falsely accused Job. They used some of their wisdom incorrectly to attack Job when they should have been comforting him in this time. And we're going to look into some of that. But what you cannot say as you read the story, one thing that is very clear is that they did have an astounding reverence for God. And they took a lot of time to seek him out and to find his ways. And they were very learned people. So one of the things we're going to look at first is we're going to try to put a timeline on the book of Job. When was this book written? Now, scholars struggle with this. A lot of people, it's really hard to put a timeline, an accurate timeline for the book of Job. But there are some clues. So we can look at Job himself. Job was from the land of Uz. Now, we know that Noah's son Shem, one of his sons was Aram. Now, Aram was the father of the Arameans, the Syrian nation. Syria was also known as Aramea. And one of Aram's sons was Uz. So most likely, Uz is the one that founded this land of Uz and was probably somewhere around the land of Syria. So Job very likely lived in the land of Syria. And he also has some friends. What do we know about his friends to help us pinpoint a time frame that this story might have happened? So let's look at Eliphaz. Eliphaz was a Temanite, and he was one of the friends of Job. Teman was a city in the land of Edom, and the founder of the land of Edom was Esau, the brother of Jacob and the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. So very likely, this Eliphaz, being a Temanite, was most likely from the city of Teman, from the land of Edom. Eliphaz was most likely an Edomite. We also have a character named Zophar. Now, Zophar was a Naamathite. Unfortunately, not much is known about a Naamathite. Many people think, many scholars believe that is likely an Arabian, somewhere in Arabia. Now, Bildad was a Shuhite. We can look at Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, and we can see that Shuhite meant of Shua. Shua was a son of Abraham. When Sarah died, Abraham remarried, and he married a woman named Keturah, and he had a number of children from Keturah. One of those children was Shua. The descendants of Shua would have been Shuhites. So Bildad was most likely a direct descendant of Abraham through Shua that he bore through Keturah. Later on down the story, we see another man, Elihu, who comes into play. Elihu is a Buzite. If we read in Genesis 22, we can find a story where Abraham is getting some news that his brother has bore some children through a woman named Milcah. And this is at the same time where Abraham is trying to find a wife for Isaac. One of the children's name was Buz, as they go down, the children that were born to Milcah. One of the children was Buz, and he was also a descendant or a kindred to a man named Aram. Now, this is not the same Aram that was the son of Shem. There's another Aram down the line. But if you look at the verse in Job, it talks about Elihu being a Buzite of the kindred of Ram. And Ram and Aram are very similar. So this is probably the same. Buz was probably the founder of the Buzites. So we can see that Elihu was very likely a descendant of Nahor, Abraham's brother. Now, where these men came from is interesting for a few reasons. One is because it kind of gives us a timeline on when this story could have occurred. So most likely it would have had to have been a descendant of one of Esau's children. So it would have to be sometime after the time of Jacob, most likely. But due to the age of Job, he reached a very great age. I wouldn't put it much past the time of Moses. It was probably before the time of Moses, most likely sometime around the same time that the children of Israel were in Egypt. And of note, we have to remember that this was before the law was written, before the prophets were written. All they had at this point in time was what was passed down from generation to generation, kind of like what we talked about last week, which is kind of why we're going to take a look at this to see the level of understanding that was available in this society during this time. So one thing that is for certain is that Job was in fact a real person. There is no doubt about that because God himself testifies to Job in the book of Ezekiel. If we look at Ezekiel chapter 14 and verse 14, we see God say, though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they should deliver but their own souls by their righteousness, saith the Lord God. Now, God repeats this a few times during this particular portion of Ezekiel. What's happening is Israel is about to be punished. And their punishment is their sins were so severe that he is saying that even if these three men were in the land, they would not be able to save the land of Israel, but they would only be able to save themselves through their righteousness, because the sins of Israel were so great. But what we see here is that God is verifying. He's given no doubt that Job was in fact a real person. Some scholars will try to say that he is more of a character, a fictional character that was used to give a lesson, to teach a lesson about life. But we see here, by God's own words, he was actually a very righteous man. God used him as almost a definition, along with Noah and Daniel, of a righteous person. So we see that God confirms that Job was an actual person. So we set the time somewhat, and we got the area. And what do we see? We see that during this time, in this land, we see a very righteous man living a very righteous life. We also see that he has a variety of friends, all of which have found a very strong understanding of God. They have sought God out their whole life, and they have had the opportunity and the ability to find out amazing things about God. Now, you can actually look through the book of Job and study it. Every time you read the book of Job, you can find something new that you did not understand before. It can teach you over and over again. It's an amazing book. Now, Job's friends, oftentimes they get looked down upon by the way they handled Job's situation. God himself rebukes Job's friends at the end of the book. So we know that they messed up. There are some things that they got wrong. I'm not going to try and refute that at all. But you have to look at the situation. I think it's very important. They were the first to encounter this great mystery of what was happening to Job. To this day, scholars, they wrestle with the book of Job. So many people, they look at the book, and a lot of people ask, why? Why did this happen to such a righteous man? These gentlemen, these men were the first ones to encounter this great mystery, and it was fresh. And they were trying to understand all these bad things are happening to you, and they come up with an answer that many people would come up with, if terrible things were happening to someone. Maybe they did something wrong, and that's kind of where they went wrong. But if you read what they were writing, what they were saying to Job, if you look at their doctrine, I challenge anybody to read through what they were saying and look at their doctrine and to point out where they went wrong. And you'll see that many of them had a very great understanding of the ways of God. They had a great understanding of the things that God does not like, the things that God does like, the things that we're not supposed to do, the things that we are supposed to do, a variety of subjects. They're talking about life before the flood. Adam is being referenced. It's an amazing amount of knowledge that these men had. And where did they get this knowledge? It's fascinating to look at. So we see Job points out where the error of his friends is going. Job knows that he is innocent. His friends, they can't believe that all these bad things would happen to him if he was innocent. So they think he did something wrong. So one of the main things that Job's friends gets wrong is their accusation towards Job. We see in the book of Job, Job says, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are ye all. Shall vain words have an end? Or what emboldeneth thee that thou answerest? I also could speak as you do. If your soul were in my soul's stead, I could heap up words against you and shake mine head at you. But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the moving of my lips would assuage your grief. So Job's friends, one of their main errors was they were using their wisdom in the wrong way. Instead of using their wisdom and their words to build up Job, they were trying to tear him down. And that was where they went wrong. Many times we can have verses, we can understand some truths about God's ways. But if we use them the wrong way, at the wrong time, in the wrong context, we can do a lot of damage. And we can turn something that would be good into something that's not so good. And that's exactly what Job's friends were doing here. They were taking all the knowledge and understanding that they have learned throughout the years, and they are using that to beat up Job with. But not only that, we see a very profound statement that Job makes in chapter 12, in verse 2. And it says, "No doubt, but ye are the people, and wisdom shall die with you." He's being sarcastic there. "But I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Yea, who knoweth not such things as these?" This is a remarkable statement here because Job is basically saying that many people know this wisdom that you guys are speaking. Job's friends are speaking like they're the ones with all the wisdom and nobody has the understanding that they have. But Job is letting them know that many people know this information that you guys are talking about. And that points directly to how much this information had spread throughout the world for many people that had a desire to learn about God. We also see that during this time, certain evil deeds that God detests are well known by these men as they're talking to Job. Because we see that one of his friends accuses him of doing all these terrible things that God hates, and that must be why all these bad things are happening. But we see a clear understanding that they know these evil deeds that God detests. And we read in this verse here, it says, "Is not thy wickedness great, and thine iniquities infinite? For thou hast taken a pledge from thy brother for naught, and stripped the naked of their clothing. Thou hast not given water to the weary to drink, and thou hast withholden bread from the hungry." And then it goes on in verse 9, "Thou hast sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless have been broken. Therefore snares are round about thee, and sudden fear troubleth thee." So they thought that Job had to have done these terrible things that God hates. So we see that God actually was reminding the children of Israel of these same truths in the book of Isaiah, chapter 58, verse 6 through 7. It says, "Is this not the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh." We see here that God is reminding the children of Israel that you're supposed to go out there and be kind to the stranger, to feed the hungry, to do these good things. And also in the book of Exodus, we see that God reiterates these truths in the very law that Moses was writing. In chapter 22, verse 21 through 24, it says, "Thou shalt neither vex a stranger nor oppress him, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Ye shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If thou afflict them in any wise, and they cry at all unto me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless." So we see these are very serious offenses to God. And we see that Job's friends knew this very well. Now we also see an amazing announcement from Job that shows just how great of an understanding that was available during this time. And this one is huge. It says, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the later day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me." Who told Job this? This is a direct picture of Christ. He was already waiting for the Messiah and the promises of God to be fulfilled. And as we see, none of these men were of the line of Jacob. They were not Israelites. They were Edomites, and sons of Abraham through Shua, sons of Abraham's brother Nahor, possibly an Arabian, a Syrian, Job being a Syrian. And yet they had this understanding, they had this knowledge, they walked and followed after God. If we use the book of Job as a reference to the effectiveness of God's approach to reach out and to draw all men to him, we can see a very clear picture that was exactly what was available during this time. And it was before the law. Mankind knew how to worship God. They knew what not to do. They knew what they were supposed to do. And it was widespread all throughout the land for those that wanted to learn and follow him. They found him. But we also see that mankind is winding down a dangerous road of idolatry. We see that ever since that man ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they have been trying to redefine what is good and evil on their own terms instead of submitting to the ways of God. Now, we also see that through their idolatry, they try to remake God into their own image instead of living in the image of God through living in the ways of God. And we see that various idolatry starts to spring up as mankind starts trying to serve a God that fits their way of life instead of changing their way of life to serve the one true God. We're also going to look at how God is beginning to make a new covenant with man. And he's going to make a special people that he's going to raise up to be a nation of priests, to witness, to minister to the entire world, to eventually bless all nations so that the whole world could come to him. This is coming at a time as Noah and his descendants, the people that lived a long time, were able to spread this word of God from generation to generation. They're beginning to die out. So God's going to start a new work, a new mighty work to bring mankind to himself because he loves us. God bless you all. I'll talk to you next time.